equity market. Watch the World Cup over the weekend.
Of course, yeah.
What do you make of that?
I'm much for fun.
Kylian Mbappe for France. That
He's
guy is just ridiculous.
I haven't looked at my bracket yet, but I would say that I love the way he comes down the ice. Like, it's just great. You know, he's out of the wing and he's
So graceful.
Yeah. And he's a big guy. I mean, for that size,
23 years old.
it's something. But you know, let's talk about it right now as we're here. Lisa's not here to tell us to shut up. But the basic idea is, hey, Jude
Bellingham.
Don't let me down.
He's fantastic. 19 years old, Borussia Dortmund, just an awesome football player. So composed at such a young age.
And it's a reason for people like me to watch the World Cup, just to watch that one guy in midfield do the magic.
France versus England coming up a little bit later Saturday. Looking forward to that.
I called Alan Cuss up and I said, could you possibly have a chair for me?
I know someone's birthday coming up this weekend too.
I don't know.
Who's is that? Equity futures right now, the S&P 500, negative 0.4%. We'll do a little get together and the World Cup.
England France.
Maybe. Equity futures negative, yields up by a couple of basis points, 350, 115 on a 10-year. Euro dollar 105, Tom. 105.33.
We got to go to the data here before we bring in Ron Temple, John. There's important data this morning. It's not a sleepy December Monday, and it's about the yield space. We've got some great guests coming up on yield. John, Choose 10 comes down to negative 81 basis points. The real yield made a threat to go to 0.99. It's at 1.07. I'm seeing yield dynamics here that are of note.
Next week. That's the big week. This week, I've got to say, Tom, let's just admit it, this week's set to be a bit of a snoozer. Quiet period for the Federal Reserve. This week already kicks in. Next week, you've got CPI and you've got a Fed decision. So CPI on the 13th, Fed decision on the 14th.
Okay.
And the runway this week, let's just say there's not many big things on the schedule.
Right, but it's a time to think and recalibrate. And one of my themes this morning, folks, I've never seen so much overthinking about this pivot and that pivot and that pivot. And what's great is Ron Temple does it on us.
We've been too cute about 2023.
Way too cute. Way too cute.
Okay.
Way too cute. We got like 8 things to talk about through the morning here. I think it's great to start with Ron Temple because he doesn't know how to spell pivot.
Let's get to Ron right now. Ron Temple, US Equity Head and Co-Head of Multi-Asset Asset Management. Ron, can we start with Friday before we really begin this week, Ron? Because I think many people are still scratching their heads. What did you make of the price action off the back of another big upside surprise on payrolls?
Well, I thought the words you used earlier about being stubbornly positive were pretty accurate. It basically shows that the market, there's a fear of missing out, it seems, in markets. And in my encounters with investors globally, it feels like there's a lot of hope still that the U.S. can avoid a recession, that the Fed can micromanage this process. I think people are forgetting that monetary policy is a sledgehammer, it's not a scalpel. And so there's a little too much optimism embedded in markets. And, I don't want to be guilty of being too cute, but I do think the market is ahead of itself in terms of optimism. When I look at the rates market, I think we're basically pricing in a best case scenario instead of the most likely scenario.
Yeah, well, I look at the best case scenario, and it comes down to earnings and revenue. I've got numbers for fourth quarter of 1.5, dare I say 1.9% real GDP, overlay on inflation, so you get a revenue pop. Does the revenue pop in the next year assist the gloom about earnings?
Well, definitely this is a positive for revenue. Inflation actually helps lift revenue, but it also, as you know, it lifts expenses. And I think the margins are going to come down. The other big piece that's missing next year is I'm in the camp now that it's very difficult for the Fed to avoid a recession. And in a recession, we typically have earnings go down 10 to 15% in a shallow cyclical recession. So I worry that the earnings estimates for next year are still far too optimistic. They've been coming down on the margin, but that revenue pop's not going to cover for all the expense pressure. And I do worry for companies the story next year is going to be all about trying to find those expenses to cut.
It was critical for me, and a major shout out to Joshua Chafin over at the FT for his commercial real estate article this weekend, which I thought was really definitive. Ron, I'm looking at combinations and transactions now that money it costs something. Are you going to see a roll up next year of a lot of these troubled companies?
I do think actually next year is going to be really interesting in terms of all the different shoes that are going to drop in the market. We still haven't seen the implications of higher rates really hit housing prices. Case-Shiller started to roll over, but it's barely rolled over. You're down a few percentage points from the peak. We started to see some pain in the commercial real estate space, but not nearly enough. And so I do think you're going to see that pain spread out. Whether it leads to consolidation or other challenges, not very clear. But But I do think we're going to see some challenges in the debt markets. They're going to lead to some strategic choices.
Ron, do you think that we need to embrace the companies that are embracing austerity? And I'm thinking of the likes of Zuckerberg and Facebook making a move in the last couple of weeks, a subtle move from Jassy over at Amazon. Do you want to embrace those companies?
I think they're making the right call. I think that especially in the tech space, by the way, a lot of these companies have basically been hiring and investing for growth, assuming that they can extrapolate out from prior years. They've recognized the reality is that trajectory has changed. I think they're making some pretty smart choices. And honestly, in any sector, we've had so much growth for so long. You need this period where you pause, you reflect, you reassess what you need, you right size. And frankly, you take some options off the table that just aren't going to pay off. And so I think this is wise, and investors should be looking at these companies carefully and evaluating those choices.
Is it too early to buy those names, though, Ron, given the earnings headwinds that you expect going into the first half of 23?